So when you see dams breaking in Borno, or just on TV, NTA talking about this, it's related to this phenomenon. Because the rivers are higher, the water reservoirs are taking more water, they are not able to contain it. When they break, you have massive flooding of agricultural lands. Flooding, that's one of the consequences. Of course, species extinction and forced migration of species. So this is what is happening. Because of the Arctic, ice melting, oceans rising, it's destroying marine life and agriculture. Those who rely on the blue economy with growth. Lake Chad region, 30 million people have been displaced. Some of those people are the people you see migrating southwards because there's no water anymore to farm, to feed the livestock. It's disrupting breeding patterns and wreaking havoc on ecosystems. Humans' impact, destroying where we live, disrupting our lives and livelihoods, wreaking havoc on farms and food supply chains. This is what you see. This is local data, where people are farming and living and fishing. Infrastructure, food supplies contaminated with fuel, diesel, and all that. Everything in the Borno axis is contaminated now, as far as foods. Climate change. People are getting submerged. Bridges, roads destroyed. So the supply chain is suffering a lot of disruption because of climate change. Forced migration and loss of valuable farmland. A lot of people who used to farm are now being evacuated into IDP camps. You see them. So these are the most food insecure. They have no land, no money, no inputs, and in a lot of cases, they are just trying to survive. Then climate change, because of the warming, is also leading to desertification. And desertification is a process where land becomes so dry, it's almost like concrete. It doesn't support life, it doesn't absorb water. So when that happens, you're going to have flooding because the ground is too dry. And this is what is happening to Africa. This is a threat to food security. The desert is advancing at the rate of 3.5 kilometers every single year. It's coming into northern Nigeria. That's Nigeria there, and other places. So that's why you see massive migration of herds and people who have been displaced looking for Greenland. 2,500 square kilometers. This is what the land looks like in most places. It cannot support agriculture. So it's not that we're not trying to plant. We are dealing with existential challenges brought on by climate change. Again, because of the warming, you're going to have frequent forest fires in some places. If you toss a cigarette butt that ordinarily would not burn the fire, because the vegetation is so dry, you can start a fire accidentally. This happens in California. A lot of these forest fires you see, Australia, a lot of times it's just because the vegetation is so dry. This is what is happening to the landscape. You can't plant anything on this land. And this is what is happening. Flash flooding. Because the ground is so dry, once it rains a little bit, everything floods. It sweeps away your topsoil and your crops. And then you have people, even down south. This is in the southern part of Nigeria. Crops are submerged because of flooding. Threatens our food security. Livestock, not spared. This is what is happening above Nigeria in the Sahara region. That's why you see herdsmen rushing down to Nigeria. It's an existential threat because they are being forced to migrate. In Nigeria, on any particular day, you have 20 million cattle, 20 million that must graze, that must drink water. 1 billion liters of water is needed. That kind of resource is not there again. So they must move. This is statistics a few years ago from my good friend Chief Algo when he was Minister of Agriculture. And he gave us this figures, which is corroborated by data we have. Look at the population of livestock. And that population is growing at the rate of 1.4% every year. So, on any given day, you have about 100 million livestock consisting of cows, sheep, goats that must graze and feed. And in the northern part of Nigeria, that resource is not there again. That's what is causing the problem. It's climate change. So now, lakes and rivers are drying up. This is what is happening. This one is actually in India, but we are beginning to see this. This was a forewarning of what will happen. Lake Chad, as I said, has shrunk by 90% in the last 30 years. 90%. We have satellite images. 30 million people have been displaced. This is satellite image of Lake Chad, 1972, 2018. That was Lake Chad, that whole stuff. This is what is left now. Very, very graphic depiction. So all those people who used to thrive for irrigation, for fishing, for even to fetch water, to cook, they have been displaced. They are rushing down to that green band of land you saw. And what happens? Insecurity, food insecurity, national insecurity. So people are migrating because they can't survive. Climate refugees. So when those people come down to so-called ancestral lands where people have been farming crops, trying to eke out a living, what do you have? Clash. And that's what we're seeing in Nigeria. And it's going to intensify because the fundamental causes are still there. Climate change. So this is what we're seeing. People are fighting for arable land, grazing fields, and other resources, water, inclusive. So, what is the conclusion? Our food supply chain in Africa depends on water and good weather conditions. So, when you have all these things I've mentioned, because of climate change, warming, oceans, sea level rise, flooding, drought, desertification, crop failures, you're going to have problems. So, what we need to do is to take a holistic look at the challenge. It's not a religious issue, it's not a political issue. We need to really sit down and begin to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about the impact of climate change and food security? Because there's a complex interrelationship between climatic pressures, political conflicts, and forced migration. Forced, because a lot of people moving don't want to move. They've been there, they have friends, they have families, they have some degree of local affinity. So they are being forced to move. The forced migration begins outside of Nigeria. Then when you start having classes inside Nigeria, people are also forced to move from their villages, their communities, and they're being pushed into IDP camps. When you do that, you completely devastate the food security of that whole area. So, climate change, in conclusion, affects all the four components. Food availability, because you can't grow it, there's no land. Food accessibility, flooding, bad roads, all kinds of issues, insecurity. Food utilization, you're not going to get the best quality food. And the system is definitely not stable. Based on some of the statistics my good friend from Kano cited, we are ranking 113 on the index, half of the 113. That's not good. Just man. So just man, what can we do? I'm asked to provide mitigating measures. Let's talk about mitigation now. Okay. What are the mitigating factors? This is on packs and plans. So what are the mitigating factors? And when we talk about mitigation, adaptation, we're just saying, how do we cope with this new phenomenon that we're facing? Mitigation talks about preventive measures. Adaptation talks about what you do after it has already happened to you. Number one, sensitization and capacity development. This platform addresses that issue. A lot of you see me on TV. I'm always on TV. Come with different ties. I'm always on TV talking about climate change and how we need to be ready and adapt. I've been with the Borno Flood. I was on TV telling them we need to go and desilt our dams. Nigeria has 300 dams. And I can tell you authoritatively, not up to 50% are desilted. Desilting means as the water is coming, it picks up debris, picks up sediment, and it deposits in the dam. So the dams are not working at full capacity. So if you design a dam, believing it will take 50 million liters of water, and now the space for 25 million has already been displaced by silt and sediment. When the water comes, it doesn't have the place to stay. So it begins to pressure the dam to the point that the dam breaks. That's what happened in Borno. One of the columns gave way. So we need to decide. So when we talk about climate change sensitization, that's very important information. People need to know because you're getting more water now. Then mitigation and adaptation. How do we mitigate these things? We need to train our farmers that climate change is real, it's affecting them, and we need to tell them how to combat it. Government policies. You know, as a professor of environmental and climate change, I have even written some regulations for Nigeria, for Nesret. I wrote the regulation on electrical and electronic devices in Nigeria, and I'm aware of all the laws and regulations. Our problem, sad, my good friend, our problem is not that we don't know some of these things. Trust me, we have the finest professors in Nigeria. A lot of it, we have all these kinds of things every 2 weeks where we brainstorm. The problem is implementation, execution. That's the thing. The yellow envelope factor. I won't say more. So we need to implement. That's the key. When we begin to implement our policies and programs, we will deal with this food security challenge. Water conservation and sustainable agriculture. Irrigation is good. There are other things we can do. Transition to regenerative and climate smart agriculture. So all these things are possible. Finally, what am I doing? You can talk a big game where your boat at, but what are you doing to solve the problem? This is what I do. I do training for NEPC. Been all over the place. I was at Rio, Kano, Lagos, and all over the place, training farmers on how to adapt and still make their products suitable for export. I engage in youth capacity development, teaching them how we can solve this security problem. Then I have my own farm. We actually practice these things. I have a farm in Abia State. I have a farm in Abuja here, off Airport Road. I get in there, I do the stuff myself. I teach This is we're using organic manure instead of chemical fertilizer, planting yam in bags. That's also another innovation to fight climate change. Instead of using 10 hectares to plant 10,000 yam, you can use 5 plots and get 10,000. We're planting plantain and pineapple, and we're doing intercropping. Same land, doing different things. So, I'm encouraging everybody. Food security can never be achieved until all of us get into farming. Farm in your backyard. This is at the back of my house, 1 hectare. And this is my suggestion to you.
Well, could it not be concluded smiling? You know, when he was presenting his paper and people were saying desert encroachments, animals dying, everywhere, some man's ITV camp, I looked at the faces of people who were not smiling. You know, suddenly he now came to mitigating factors and was providing solution, and I saw somebody say, it's not all blue. Thank you very much. Thank you. Prof, don't go back to America again. We need you here. Thank you. So very quickly, I understand they have solved.
And our vision is a world